Good morning and welcome to my first webinar. It's all about failure demand. You know, of all the concepts that we've developed in Vanguard, failure demand has got the strongest legs. Loads of people understand the idea, but unfortunately, most of them misunderstand it immediately. So the purpose of the webinar is to explain the concept, how we developed it, what it is and what it isn't, and most importantly, how to eradicate it, and to encourage people to avoid the misunderstandings and certainly avoid the false remedies that are out there now in the market. They won't help you. So, right now, so before I get on to failure demand, I need to tell you a little bit about Vanguard and how the Vanguard method got developed. Now, my first proper job was as a prison psychologist, and I was training in clinical psychology so that I could do one-to-one sessions with prisoners. And I met a professor from London who said to me, well, John, instead of working with individuals, why don't you work on the system? You'll have a much greater impact. And it was one of those moments in life when you think, well, I'm sure, I think he's right, but I don't know what to do. So I stopped studying clinical psychology and I went to study under him in London, occupational psychology. And I became fascinated with the subject called intervention theory and method. You know, the purpose of an interventionist, according to this work, is to go into a human system, help people do things such that in the future they can solve similar problems themselves. Now, that's very different from what most consultants do. You know, the big consultancies encourage their senior partners to get to a position with the clients where the clients won't think without them. They encourage dependency. Vanguard is very strong on independent thought and action. So it's giving people the wherewithal to solve problems. However, having developed an enthusiasm for intervention theory and method, I kind of realized, and this is at the end of the 70s, I had no meat in my sandwich. I didn't have stuff to intervene on. And then I got lucky in a couple of ways. The first was I was asked to audit TQM programs that failed. Some of you might remember those. They're no different in a sense to an interventionist from what goes on today with things like Lean and Six Sigma, you know, which you train your people in some tools and send them out and solve some problems that you think you've got. I learned a lot. One of the things that I did, you know, if you're going to evaluate a change program, you've got to find out how an organization works to see whether or not the change worked. And I would interview managers about, well, tell me how your organization works. And I'd review my notes and I'm thinking, do you know, they're telling me what they do, which is not the same as what works. And because they were quality programs, I had to read all the gurus, and the light came on when I read Deming's book, Out of the Crisis. I regard it as a must-read book. It's a scathing criticism of Western management thought. And he makes the obvious point that we, mankind, invented management and organizations. They don't work very well, so we can change them, and we should manage them as systems. And that became my focus. Well, how do you manage a service organization as a system? Deming didn't have much to say about that. I thought, well, that's a useful thing to work out. And then I got lucky in a second way. I worked with the same man who was a director of a business, then a series of chief executive jobs where we had to turn businesses around. He valued the idea of studying first to get knowledge, to see it as a system, which is a very, very important part of the Vanguard method. And we would only argue about whether we knew enough. And he would always say to me, well, if we make a change and we get it wrong, it's okay because we're still studying. We'll see it quickly. And really, he taught me speed, how quickly you can change a service organization if you've got a leader behaving like that. So that was the period in which the Vanguard method was really developed. That was sort of through the late 80s and through the 90s. But failure demand, we first discovered, we didn't call it that, but we first discovered it way back in the mid-80s. We were working with Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, is since gone, but it's a big computer company. And in about 1986, they set up something called Deck Direct. This was to sell computers over the phone. And the guy running it, a guy called Mike Swalwell, he wanted to have more sales, which is entirely reasonable. That's their purpose. And he was getting some advice from people saying, well, if you want more sales, the thing to do is incentivize the front line. And I said, no, I don't think we should do that, because being a psychologist, I know that if you incentivize work, you get less of what you want. That maybe is a subject for another webinar. So Mike said to me, well, what do we do then, John? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll go and have a look. We'll have a chat. So I spent a couple of days out there listening to phones, calls, and whatever. And there's all these calls from people saying, well, what you sent me doesn't work, it doesn't have a cable, the plug's the wrong size, I don't know how to do this, and so on. And it's such a high volume. And I said to them, we call them, well, these are calls we don't want. And if we could actually work in such a way that we always send the customers exactly what they want, and we wouldn't get these calls, that would open up our capacity and sell more. And that kind of became the focus. Another experience in the late 80s was when automated call distribution systems came along, which enabled people to set up call centers. And we were working with one of the major banks. And the idea was, see, managers focus on transaction costs. And they would say, oh, you know, look at all these phone calls happening in the branches where we pay people £16,000 a year in those days. We could take that phone work out of the branches, stick it in the call centre in the armpits of Britain, you know, put it in Swansea and Sunderland, where the labour's cheap, and we'll get a cheaper transaction. So they did that, and they sent out the men in the white coats, and they measured how many calls, how long they took, and they had a plan for 3 call centres with 500 seats or whatever in each. And they switched it over, and demand went up. So they did what you would do if you think the way they think. You know, they worry about how many calls, how many people, how long they take. So they opened the 4th, and then demand went up, and they opened the 5th. The manager but the chief executive got a bit upset about this, because now it was more expensive than having people do phone calls in the branches. The managers running the call centre said, well, boss, it's like the M25. We couldn't have predicted how popular these call centres are. The customers keep ringing us up, they love us. Well, we helped them go and study it, and more than half of their demand was failure demand. We still didn't use that label then. But it's kind of interesting that when we showed them that this is something that is created because the service is ineffective, their immediate reaction, and this is still common, their immediate reaction, you'd say, well, what do you think is causing this? They say, well, it's the bloody people. If those people did as they should, we wouldn't get the failure. Or it's the processes. So just keep to the processes as we've designed them. And that's all wrong. You know, and it's no different to what happened in local authorities who, obliged by Tony Blair to meet a target of having a call centre by 2005, did the same thing, built a call centre, and demand was always more than they had in the plan. Well, you know, one of the mistakes, a part of the mistake, is to assume that taking the telephone work out of a functional service and putting it somewhere else is an effective way to deal with customers. But the problem's much bigger than that, much bigger. So I'm going to explain the causes of failure demand by taking a profoundly good case. So this is a British insurance company, one of the major insurance companies, and it's a few years ago. They had outsourced their telephone work to India. In fact, a lot of their front office and back office work to India, quite common. It was part, you know, the bandwagon in those days, go for low transaction costs. They had about 500 people in India. They had about 200 in the UK, so 700 in total. They weren't happy with what was happening, you know, with the service in India. They decided to repatriate all the work to the UK. Now, if you're a conventional manager and you're going to make that change, you'd have a plan. And in the plan, you'd obviously need another 500 bodies in the UK to deal with the work. Well, we suggested that you put the plan away and let's go study. Well, they had about 70% failure demand on the front of the system. And by this stage, we were calling it failure demand. The definition, failure demand, is demand caused by a failure to do something or do something right for the customer. We settled on sometime in the early 90s. They had about 70% failure demand. Well, why? Well, let's just talk about their design. And this is a common design in service organizations with the advent of ACDs and other technology. So they had a front office and a back office. The front office is the service center. What do you do? Well, you're worried about how many people, how many calls, how long they take. So you manage activity. It's one of your principal controls. So number of calls you do, or how long you take on a call, or both. You worry about service levels. Do we pick the phone up? You frequently standardize the work by using protocols or scripts, that kind of thing. Specialize the work, so different people can do different things. That enables you to put an IVR, press 1 for this, 2 for that on the front. And you respect the workers. You hear that this call may be recorded for training purposes. Well, that's inspection. And then back office, I don't know whether you know, but like a lot of bad ideas, it started in America. This American called Chase said, well, here we are in our service centers trying to sweat the labor. That's management's job. And we've got a problem because the customers are ringing in and people have finished a call and they might be doing some sort of paperwork. They call it wrap time in call centers. And now you've got a dilemma. Do you stop doing the stuff to finish off the customer transactions? So stop doing your wrap thing and take another call. What do? We said, well, we can solve that problem by decoupling the customer from the service. We use the front office to find out what they want and now send it off to the back office without the customer. So now you can sweat the labor. The customer's decoupled from the service. Now you sweat the labor in the back office. And in the back office, you worry about activity, standard times, specialized work, you standardize work, and so on. Now, when you study, the interesting thing is you learn what causes failure demand. Basically, it's everything you're doing. It's your design, the whole design. If you've got a front office and a back office, you've got two views of the customer. One in front of the customer, one working on rules. If you constrain activity, you must do this in 3 minutes or whatever it is. You stop the system absorbing variety, and there's variety in customer demand in service organizations. If you standardize the work, a favorite of the lean people, a stupid thing to do, because you stop the system absorbing the variety of customer demand. If you specialize the work, you increase the number of handovers, things take longer, and that creates failure demand. If you inspect people, they worry about what they're doing from the point of view of passing the inspection, which is not the same as dealing with the customer. And we've got examples of that going on right now in the news, in the health service. So all of these things. So then you help them redesign it. So, part of the Vanguard method is study, get knowledge, you understand the what and why of current performance, you can predict performance going forward, you can understand the failure and the causes of failure. Now, you can also study the things you need to know in order to design a more effective service. And the most critical thing in the transactional service system is to understand demand in customer terms. Once you've understood demand and you can predict demand going forward, then you can use that to build the expertise you need in the front end of your service organization to give the customers what they need. Of course, when you're training people, they can't learn everything in one go. But the things they don't know, they get help for. They pull help when they have got a problem that they don't know how to solve. So they go to work every day, solve problems for customers, and learn to solve more problems for customers. They're not constrained in terms of activity management, but you measure the actual time it takes to do things, and that goes off to the resource planners. It's not used to manage the workers. The three primary controls that you use, you think about the controls in a conventional design, it's controlling activity, service levels, inspection, those are the controls and so on. The three primary controls in these designs are an understanding of demand, a focus on doing the value work, that's the thing that matters to the customer, and measuring achievement of purpose in customer terms. Those are the controls. When you control an organization in that fashion, costs, which are a lagging measure, not a primary measure, go down, and they go down massively. So now, in this organization's case, they built that redesign developed it in the UK, brought on more people as they needed to, as they increased their capacity in this design in the UK, and they ended up providing a far better quality service in the UK for all of their customers with only 300 people. That's from 700 to 300. That's the size of the prize. Now, who'd have put that number in a plan? It's a spooky issue, isn't it? Because what we teach is if you want to make a change, don't need a plan, don't need a cost-benefit analysis, don't need any of that normal stuff. What you do need is knowledge, and you get that from studying. So, what's important about all that? Well, because the Vanguard method is normative. If you stand in a room, like I'm talking to you now, and if you tell people, well, if you're managing this way and you have your service levels and you manage activity and your inspection, you have all those things, then you're going to work very well. Well, man, that's a rational intervention. I speak, you listen, and you map it onto your worldview and you go, the man's nuts, or no, it'd be all right if you do it right, or whatever. But if you go out and study, it's a normative thing. And what we're good at, and we're making all these tools available, is how you go and study. You learn things that you wouldn't believe are true, they're counterintuitive, but because you learn them, you've seen them for yourself, you get there. And you cross a Rubicon. And once you've understood these things, you can't go back to managing the way that you know now is dysfunctional. Now that organisation, for example, they're a few years in to using these methods, and it's now mandatory to use the Vanguard method worldwide. Well, why? Because of the size of the results. So, next up, I'm going to talk about digital services because it's one of the current fads. But before I do that, I'm going to see if we've got any questions. Good morning, John. I'm a manager in a call centre. We're trying to adopt the systems thinking method from time to time. Senior management is swayed back to traditional management. How do you deal with this situation? Good question. And the answer is, unfortunately, you've made the mistake of cracking on with using our principles in the operations without the senior manager's understanding. When we work in an organisation, the very first thing we do is we take the senior leaders out to understand what's going on. We call it scoping because they like that word, scoping. You know, they can see the size of the prize and they can scope. They like all that. But actually what we're doing is showing them things that they wouldn't believe. So we're helping them cross that Rubicon first. If you don't do that, if you haven't got leaders who understand what's going to happen, then you're only going to have a train crash. So Alana, my suggestion to you is wherever you got to, hold it and do what you can, use any trickery you like to get senior people out understanding some of the fundamentals. Or you could even, hey, I'll tell you what, you could even get them to watch this afterwards because we're going to put it up on the web afterwards. Richard Tashma, he says, thanks for the excellent presentation. Yes, very sweet of you, Richard. I've been following you for a while. I haven't noticed. I'll look behind me more often. So I was intrigued when I heard Dave Snowden talk about his work with Prince 2. Do you know Dave? Yes, I do. Do you fellows share any opinions about the health service? I don't know what Dave's opinions are about the health service. My opinion is that the health service is massively dysfunctional, wastes a lot of money. It's been industrialized. It's very good if you have an acute condition, but when it gets into maintenance, it's bloody awful. It's fragmented, there's no continuity, and you have to manage yourself. And the amount of failure demand is absolutely shocking. Sophia says, could you talk about failure demand in terms of housing services? Oh, yes. Lots, easy to redesign out. I'll be talking later about a conference that we're putting on in November, to which I'm going to make a special offer for you. I'll talk about it at the end. There's a housing case in there which absolutely knocks your socks off. These people can deliver repairs to tenants on the day and at the time the tenant wants it. The costs are massively reduced and the failure demand has gone from around 50% to negligible. David Briggs, he says, regulation is a huge strain on resources in the public sector. Can you advise on the best way to deal with ISO? Well, there's two different issues there, David. ISO 9000, I assume you mean, purports to be a quality standard, but it's not. It's a specification and inspection methodology. That's not quality. I wrote a whole book about that. Regulation is a big issue, and I talk a lot about what's wrong with regulation in the Whitehall effect. The way we conceptualize regulation is similarly a specification and inspection methodology, which is what causes. I mean, it's another cause of all these problems you're hearing about the health service in Gosport at the moment. That's how managers are focused on the wrong things. Raymond says that Vanguard had success in adult social services. And the answer is yes, enormously so. We've got a periodical you could read about that. About a third of the Welsh local authorities use our methodology. Dramatic improvements on life being put back on the rails and reductions in costs. In fact, Raymond, I'm going to be talking about what I call people-centered services a little later. So, digital. Got to do digital, haven't you? You know the pitch, don't you? Well, you don't want to be the next Blockbuster, do you? Everyone's doing it. Are you going to save a fortune on your transaction costs putting things through a digital channel? And your customers, you know, these people walking around looking at their machines all the time, they want it all on their handheld device. That's the pitch. Well, what's the method? Well, we've been seeing this in banks led by the big consultancies, and it's shocking. They have 3 steps. They talk about incubate, and then they talk about design, and then they talk about implementation. What does incubate? What does incubate mean? Well, it means you dream stuff up. They have you developing personas. These are imaginary people. Well, here's Jane, 42-year-old mother, single parent, 2 children. How does she want to interact digitally with our bank? And they dream stuff up. And then they design it, and then they implement it. And then they have targets for driving customers into these new digital services. And you know what happens? Massive amounts of failure demand hit their call centers because these are ineffective things. It's quite extraordinary. Now, some banks have woken up to this. They've spent millions, I mean, tens of millions on these digital services, and they've got all this failure demand in their call centers. They see that, you know, they look across the piece. You know, the big consultants are claiming savings on the transaction cost side, but when you look across the piece, the whole thing's much more expensive. Net cost up. Shocking. So what amuses me is some of them send out requests for quotations from people like me, and they actually say in them, we want your advice on how to change our customers' behaviour. Numpties. You see, they think it's like ATMs. You know, when ATMs came along, we got to change the customer's behaviour so they get the money out of the hole in the wall instead of going into the bank. Yes, but ATMs worked, you know. This is not about changing the customer's behaviour. It's changing your behaviour. The problem, the way you went about this was entirely wrong. So we've been doing rescue work with these people. Now, what does that mean? Well, we say, never mind your incubate, stop. We're going to start in a different place. Before you do anything else, let's go study. Most importantly, let's study demand. You know, the customers are shouting at you through the system with the demand, not only the failure demand, but also, you know, what they want. And don't stop there. Let's study how well the system currently services that demand. Now, let's improve that design so we get less failure demand and better quality service to the customer. Then and only then do we address the question, can IT further improve what's happening for the customer? IT should be the last thing you do, not the first. Of course, IT vendors wouldn't like that very much. Let me give you an example. You know, these people dreaming stuff up. They always think in technology terms. What can technology do? Well, technology can help you track things. Oh, all these people with mortgage applications, why don't we have a mortgage tracker? Yay, great idea. Let's build a mortgage tracker. And we say, well, why? Let's go study mortgages. And what you learn when you study mortgages is that there's an awful lot of places in the current design where stuff is taking a long time and the customer clearly don't know what happened, so they'll track. this is value demand or failure demand? I think you know the answer. So you redesign the mortgage service so the customers always know where they stand and never need to track. Ka-ching! You actually achieve more mortgage sales because you solve people's problems faster, and they're happier because they know what's going on, and you didn't need your mortgage tracker. You know, it's amazing. You know, a lot of these IT companies say, "Oh, it's going to be cool because we're doing agile." But as my friend Toby Rubberer says, you know, that they're doing agile in the command and control world. You know, so the people managing them are worried about utilization, billable time, productivity. It's amazing. They have backlogs in their work. Isn't that incredible? Backlogs in their work. They go, "Oh, it's all right, John," because, you know, according to Scrum parlance, the product owner is responsible for prioritizing the backlog. Hey. And I'm thinking, why have you got a backlog? You know, what does perfect look like? My most exciting, I think, example currently, well, there are two, one in South Africa, one in Canada. Let me tell you about the one in Canada. This is a service provider in the telecommunications, internet kind of world. And they understand the need for digital services, but of course they've been working with us for a couple of years on the design of their services. And they've got the routine of study, get knowledge, use knowledge to design an effective service. And they've got the software developers working with the frontline doing that. So you've got customer demand, the frontline people, the software developers, and of course their leaders. And then they know how to study and design. And the software developers have been doing this for such a period of time now that they're also fully confident of doing the service agent's work. Everything they make in software terms is used because we know why it's going to improve things. You compare that with, you know, the normal agile industrial process. Well, actually, most of what they make isn't even used. So, step one, get knowledge. Step two, improve the service. Step three, pull IT. IT last. Now, I'm going to move on to people-centered services. Someone was asking about that. I think it was Raymond. I've forgotten though. But before I do, because this is going to move into the public sector, I want to tell you one of my favourite stories about failure demand in the public sector. There was a woman in the Cabinet Office, who's going back a few years, who cottoned on to this idea of failure demand. Her name was Sarah Fulton. So she sent out a note, because this is how government works in the UK, you know, they decide what you're going to do. So she sent out a note to all the local authorities saying, what we want you to do is to go and measure your failure demand and then set yourself targets to reduce it. Because I think that's a bloody joke, because targets are one of the things that create failure demand. And so I happened to bump into Sarah at a government conference I was invited to. And I said, well, you know, there's an awful lot of people out there who understand that what you're doing, Sarah, is the wrong thing to do. And she looked at me and said, well, I can find a similar number of people who would say what I'm doing is absolutely the right thing to do. And I said to her, well, I think it was Socrates who said you can't find the truth by counting heads. And she said, you don't need to tell me that. I'm a classics scholar. That's what you need, isn't it? You want to improve public services? Go and hire a few classics scholars. Rock and roll. Let's have some questions. I wonder if we've got a question here from a classics scholar. Oh, it was Raymond who talked about, that's rather nice, when you open the questions, you're in the same place. See, I'm learning about this thing. So that's coming next, Raymond. Tom asked, if we apply systems thinking to health, then in broad terms, is public health, oh, I can't say that word, being ineffective is what Tom asks. Well, I mean, the scope for improvement in the health service is extraordinary. you know, I've so much, I mean, we could do a whole webinar on the health service, but, you know, why would you treat a bed as a constraint in the health system? Completely bonkers. And when you actually improve the health service, you use fewer beds. It's a really, and we've published a lot on that. Jonathan White, he says, I'm from an organisation that's also insurance-based. We're looking at the prospect of joining customer service and sales functions together. Okay. What would you say are your top tips to make this a success? I'm responsible for training and development staff. Right. Well, okay. Well, it depends what sort of sales function you've got. This is a complicated question, actually. I mean, one of my previous answers, Jonathan, you pay attention to, don't do anything with systems work without getting the leaders to understand first. Go study your sales function. We can give you advice on how to do that. The way we think about it is you've got to address the question, how many customer acquisition processes do you have? Could your customers come to you via some kind of process? Study that, understand how they come to you. You might find it's got nothing to do with your salespeople. That often happens, or nothing to do with marketing. That can happen too. But at least you're in a position of knowledge for going forward. What you want to avoid, of course, are incentives. You'll find when you study what the incentives are doing to sales, getting you fewer sales. But you've got this is such a big topic. I can't really spend a lot of time on it today, but you can get in touch and I'll give you some advice. Emma Jones, she says, thank you very much for a great discussion so far. Thank you, Emma. I work in the NHS, okay, and I'm interested in how contextual features like culture and teamwork can affect the implementation of improvement programs to understand and reduce failure demand. We don't understand the capture and measure context yet. It's a dilemma. Okay. Culture and teamwork. Well, Emma, here's the thing. When you try to change your culture, like a lot of companies do, it's not very effective because it's the system conditions that govern behavior. When you get a team of people together and study and redesign, the teamwork is palpable, amazing, and the culture changes. Well, why? Because they all come to the same view, So culture change is free, is the way I put it. When you study and redesign together, you're off. Everything changes. Your behaviour changes, most importantly. Anonymous asks, can you talk about failure demand in respect to children's social care? I'm going to talk about adult care next. It's the same for children's. Could you advise, another anonymous, could you advise about failure demand for a typical IT service desk? What are the pitfalls to look out for? Yes, you'll find a lot. We have an e-learning system. You'll find a lot of stuff on IT help desks on there. A first question you've got to ask, Mr. Anonymous attendee, is, does your help desk help? You usually find it doesn't. You usually find the design is a kind of conventional industrial design where you've got a front end that picks up the call, and then you've got level 1, level 2, level 3. When you study what's going on, you see how shocking that is for customers, how ineffective it is, how it drives more cost up, and how it makes time go longer. Often help desks should be called give you a ticket desks. That's all they do. But you'll find a lot on the e-learning system about help desks. Tom Wicks, he says, good morning, John. Good morning, Tom. If my company is sending customers computers with the wrong and no cables, shouldn't I focus on the root cause of this issue as well as having... well, yes, of course. Yes, of course. And what? I'll tell you something really interesting. Sorry, Tim Wicks. Tim, really interesting. We work with a company in Ireland who resell stuff their customers have sent back because it wasn't right for them. And there's huge business reselling stuff that their customers didn't want. So we went over to the other bit of the business that did this, and what did we find? Well, the reason customers are getting things that they didn't want is because there are incentives in the part where they sell to them. How bizarre. So we refused to help the bit of the business that sells repackaged things, but never mind. Susan says, hello, John. We've used Vanguard for a while, but it's a bit like going to the gym. Well, I don't know, so I don't go to the gym. My discipline sometimes slips. Well, that's true of me too. Any top tips on keeping in the Vanguard zone in my everyday job as Chief Executive Officer of a social care organisation? Yes, Susan. Make sure you spend a good deal of your time asking the kinds of questions that a leader would ask out there where the rubber hits the road. So you'll hear these things when I talk about social care next, but it's really important. Have we understood this person, their context and their needs? Are the things that we're doing actually helping them, or the things that we provide that don't help them? But I'm going to do a bit more when we come back to the main agenda. Okay, Raja asked a really interesting question. This is clearly somebody who's followed our work, because he says, can you please let us know the best method of rolling people in to a new system? Well done, Raja. You see, roll in is a Vanguard expression as opposed to roll out. Roll out is, now here's the answer, roll out, do it. Roll in is a normative process from intervention theory. So you've built a new design. You might have done a proof of concept, you've got a prototype, whatever it is you've decided. You've built this thing, it now works, you can demonstrate the economics are much better, the customer satisfaction is much better, all those good things. And now you've got loads of people who work in the old way, they've got to learn to work in the new way. So you need to design a normative experience, otherwise they're going to bring their baggage. So you take them through what we learned in the study phase. And if they argue with it, they do some studying. And then you take them through the principles for the redesign and why it's going to work. And then you train them in how to behave in that redesign, and then you put them to work. That's a roll-in methodology. Again, there's a lot of that on the e-learning system. Hoping you explained the best approach to digital services. I did. This is Michael. How can it be done in public sector? Oh, watch out, public sector. I just got sent a thing that says, a little tiddly-pot, a local authority in the east of England has joined up with one of the big consultancies to do artificial intelligence. And it's certainly artificial and it's not very intelligent. The problem with computers is they work on rules, and they're following the same path I just talked about. Dream stuff up, implement it. You've got to start by studying demand. You can, and we are helping clients build digital services, but only where digital helps the service work in a better way. Well, John M. Morning, John. Worth it to hear you. It's very sweet of you, John. If you could get everyone here, I don't know where here is, to change one thing about how they work within their industry, what would it be? Knowledge of the organisation as a system. That's the one thing. Can you provide a clear example, Tim Guy says, of the interventions that led to a reduction in failure demand? Well, I thought I did. I've given you two solid ones so far. The general case, front office, back office, and how the redesign using different controls threw out the failure demand, and I've done that with digital as well. Francisco, hello John, it's a pleasure to hear you talk about this interesting and crucial subject. Thank you very much. I did a talk on Beyond Budgeting. Am I working with Beyond Budgeting? He wants to know, or she wants to know, I don't know. Yes, we are the UK representative of the Beyond Budgeting group, and we're doing a lot on but basically what's wrong with budget management. I'm writing about that in my next book, and also we're helping people. I'm actually helping people understand how services both generate and use money. We're also finding that when you apply the method correctly, you can predict performance going forwards, and therefore you can predict costs, and so you obviate the need for monthly budget review. So that again could be a subject of another webinar. Sonia Doherty, have you been able to implement Vanguard in schools? No, not yet, but I just bumped into a head teacher who really wants to do something. We have done a lot in universities, not in the classroom, but in terms of things like admissions and use of rooms and maintenance and so on. Okay. Harper asked, do any of the big four consultancies, accountants use systems things? No, they say they do, but no. No, they're out and out command and control freaks. But that's what sells to command and control managers. And it's an interesting thing about command and control. You say to people that the problem with command and control, they go, yeah. And they think the problem is the command word. But actually, what I'm telling you is the problem is the control word. It's when you change your theories of control, then things start getting better. Russ Lewis said, ha, ha, ha. Well, thank you, Russ. Maybe well, he also said, don't forget predicting the future. Indeed. Alex Webster, what would you say about an IT company supplying a digital transformation, in inverted commas, to a service organization where the IT company supplies exactly what the customer is asking for, but the end result is not what the service organization meant? Management dreamed would happen. The customer got what they asked for. I've got no idea. Is there still failure demand there? No idea. But I think, I've covered the general approach to digital, and they get away with it, these big IT companies, because their contract is to deliver, this make stuff up, put it out there, get some volume of traffic through it, and then take the money. They're not responsible for all the failure demand that occurs. This is a long one. Hi, John. So Rita, she says, I am currently working on an initiative where I identify considerable failure demand caused by internal systems due to focus on telephony rather than right first time resolution. Senior stakeholders feel the reduction in failure demand should immediately result in additional capacity. However, we're asking for the work to be done in full at first touch, preventing failure demand. How would you tackle this? Well, the most important thing, as I described earlier, Sarita, is that you work out your capacity and the number of people that you need from measuring the actual time it takes to solve problems for customers. And you know that this will be cheaper than before because it's this number of transactions that matter. That's the most important. People-centered services. If you listen to the news on the radio, you hear it all the time. People are getting older. Demand is rising. Who's going to pay? Well, the only truth is that people are living longer. Demand isn't rising. And I say that because we've helped leaders study it. Demand is stable. Demand into care services, stable. Acute services, stable. Outpatients, likewise. So, what is rising fantastically is failure demand. Now think about this. If your life falls off the rails and you put your hand up for help from the state, you'd imagine in a civilized world that someone would pop along, find out what's wrong and help you. Well, that doesn't happen. You see, our care services have been industrialized, our health services have been industrialized and specialized, and they're managed on targets and activity. So you might get more than a dozen people turning up, all looking at you through their own specialist lens, trying to decide if what they've got they should provide to you, and worried about their budget. So they set thresholds, so you've got to be kind of seriously in trouble before they part with some of that money to provide you with the service. And if they do provide you with the service, the chances are these days it's commissioned. And if you go to, because the government believes in the market will drive prices down. If you go to the market, you've got to have a specification that's standardized, because otherwise how can they price it? And then what you observe when you study is that these standardized services don't meet the variety of demand. Now imagine that, about a dozen or more people filling in their forms, closing your case, which meets their targets, referring you on, that kind of thing. Someone might commission a service for you and that doesn't work. We've done all of that and you ain't helped. Now you might think that's extraordinary and it can't be true. Well, I just say, go study. Like I said to somebody earlier, there's a publication, one of our periodicals, talks about all of this. There's lots of stuff on our e-learning system that talks about this. That's what you learn when you study services to do with people whose lives have fallen off the rails. And we bag them all together. When we started working in local authorities, we do things like housing, we do homelessness, we would do benefits, we do council tax. And then if we're working with the police force in that area, we'd be dealing with issues too. But what you see suddenly is it's the same people. And they might be accessing all these different front doors. No one's actually finding out what's going wrong for them. We're all looking at them from our point of view, a provider point of view. Well, when the leaders have studied something like that, they see how much money this is wasting, and also how people don't really get better. And that opens the door to, well, why don't we study a more effective service for people whose lives have fallen off the rails? It comes back to the same issues. Demand, the three controls: demand, the value, work and achievement of purpose in customer terms. But now it's individuals terms, this person. So in these redesigns, and there are many around the country and in Scandinavia and in Australia, in these redesigns, whenever someone puts their hand up, you turn up. You don't use a call centre, you don't use a form, you don't use barriers. Hand up, turn up. When you get there, what you're interested in is what's happened, what's the context, and what matters to you. And how would you describe living a good life, or indeed having a good death? And assessment, that takes, as long as it takes, could be 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 years, it doesn't matter, because it's about understanding the person and their particular needs. But once that's understood, the next step is what can we do to help you take responsibility for achieving what you would like to achieve? And then what help should we pull from the family, the community, the voluntary sector, state provision to help you achieve that aim, in a sense tailored to you? Only what you need, not what we provide. And it's the most amazing thing, and this is published, we're doing a lot of this work. I think it's the most important work that we do, frankly. The most amazing thing is that a lot of lives are quickly put back on the rails, and the care services rapidly come in way under budget and carry on in successive years. Under budget, no major crisis. Tell that to the politicians. Well, of course, it doesn't suit their narrative. See, they like their narrative of demand is rising, people are older, who's going to pay? They like that. The true narrative should be politicians saying, gosh, we waste a lot of money having industrialized people-centered services. We're the problem. That's the true narrative. So when you apply these designs, not only do you have a lot more lives quickly back on the rails and costs are much lower, the most interesting thing, which we wouldn't have predicted, is that demand in that geography falls. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that the purpose of public services? So let's think about some of the conclusions. Oh no, before I talk about conclusions, just one other thing. There's a lot of people in the public sector who've got this idea that you need to manage demand. You see a lot of it about, you manage demand, have thresholds, turn services off, signpost people elsewhere. No. I wrote a whole chapter in the Whitehall Effect on the stupidity of their ideas and mapping out all the things they propose, and talking about what's rubbish. All you got to do with demand is understand it, and understand it from the customer or the citizen's point of view. That's the big lever. Don't manage it. That's for fools. So let me summarize for you what are my main points. Failure demand is systemic. It's not the people, it's not the processes, it's the whole design. It's systemic. It's a signal of ineffectiveness. That's all it is. Don't bother buying a load of tools to measure it. It's shouting at you that what you got is ineffective. So you've got to go and study in order to find out why it's ineffective. And you need to get the knowledge, particularly the knowledge of demand, in order to start designing a service that's ineffective. And that's how you eradicate failure demand, by designing effective services. It's as simple as that. Now, I mentioned earlier, on November the 15th, at the Forest of Arden Hotel, which is near Birmingham Airport, very easy for everyone to get to, we're running a special event on eradicating failure demand. And we'll be featuring leaders from service organisations in a variety of sectors who are going to tell their story about how they studied, what they learned, how they designed, and the consequences, the eradication of failure demand. There are some amazingly powerful stories being lined up. I also mentioned we have an e-learning system. You might find that useful too if you want to have a crack at this stuff on your own. Now I'm going to do a few more questions, and then we're going to wiggle off. So, David Ferguson, John, I guess we're talking about clearly defining the problem we're looking to solve. Yes. You talk a lot about talking to managers and bringing them on a journey. What's your approach to understanding user perceptions, feelings, and experience? Oh, David. Oh, do you know, there are a lot of jobs out there at the moment, called customer experience manager. I don't know if you're one of those, but I tend to find they know nothing much about the customer experience, because they run focus groups and do surveys and things like that. The big lever is understanding demand in customer terms. The customers are not very fussy. They just want what they want. And if you understand demand and understand the value work from their point of view, their feelings and experience and perceptions look after themselves. Laura, do you think we'll be experiencing some form of failure demand after Brexit in regards to the IT sector in that way within local government? No idea. IT is a major problem, as I've talked about. There's a lot of articles on my site about IT, what's wrong with it, how they dupe you, why it should be last, not first. But I can't really relate that to Brexit. Anonymous attendee, how do you suggest that IT digital techniques can be implemented if they're necessary at the last stage of evaluation? Well, I don't understand what that means. I'm telling you that IT should be the last thing you do based on knowledge, and everything you build will be used because you can predict how it's going to improve the flow. Paul Robbins asked, any advice on the first step to be able to begin challenging the concept of an SLA for answering calls in a service centre? No, mate, I wouldn't. Paul, I wouldn't go challenge the concept because you might get fired. This is back to the one I talked about before. Your first task, don't challenge leaders. They don't like it very much. Your first task is to get leaders to see things that they wouldn't believe otherwise, especially if you told them. So your first critical job is to design some normative loops for the leaders. What we're currently doing, we're so busy in Bangor, but we're currently thinking about putting some of this stuff into like an accreditation program, teaching stuff where you can access things. There's a lot of this also on the e-learning system already. So, the question here for Paul really, or the answer for Paul is, the question really should be, how do I design a normative loop for my leaders to get them to understand that an SLA, amongst many other things, is a pretty stupid idea. Hi, John. Good to see you. Says Simon Whiter. What have you found the best way to continually measure value demand in large organisations, senior leadership, get real-time insight into whether the customer's experience is getting better or a failure demand spike has happened? Well, the important thing here, Simon, is that in the redesign, where you're focused on understanding demand, building the expertise, service the demand, providing further expertise on a pool basis, measuring achievement in customer terms, the management roles around that have changed from managing, the people and the activity, which is working on the 5%, to working on the 95%. And so they're focused on the kinds of questions that you're asking. So it's what's failure demand looking like? Because it should be in the redesign very, very low. And you've got to bear in mind things will always go wrong. So if it's low, don't worry about it too much. You're only looking for stuff that's predictable. But they're really focused on value demand and is it changing as part of their job? And does that have implications for the way we're training our people, the way they're pulling, stuff happening that should happen here that they're pulling, so we'll move it. So it's management roles is basically the answer to your question. Paul Robbins says, challenging. Well, that's been my life. Lee asked, have you worked with local authorities and choice-based lettings? Oh, yes. Yes. And indeed, we help local authorities get rid of choice-based lettings because it's junk. It was based on a very good idea from the Netherlands, but then it got buggered up by Whitehall and turned it into something completely stupid. And when you study, you find there's an awful lot that you shouldn't be doing, and it's not good for people. When you redesign lettings, I can think of years ago, people in Swansea built a redesign. So, people walk in and what do they want to know? They want to know, will you house me? And if you will house me, when will you house me? And because they've they've worked and changed the system, they can answer the first question. They can answer both of those questions within about 10 minutes. That's so people know where they're staying. Where are they going to get housed? And if they are, when is it likely? Because it's amazing that you can predict what types of houses are going to become available. Again, there's a lot of that stuff on the e-learning system. Right, well, I've run over time, and there's still quite a lot of you here, and thank you for hanging around. Richard Barmer says, I'm trying to apply systems thinking in a manufacturing environment where there's a lot of entrenched thinking and hype about lean tools. Do you have any advice on how to break through this culture barrier of work? You've got the answer there. You've got to work on the senior management. And lean is junk, basically. Let's just think about this. Who are the gurus in lean? Jim Womack, Dan Jones, what's his name? Jeffrey Liker. Dan Jones never worked in an organisation. Jim Womack has only ever worked in a bicycle factory, and that went bust. Jeffrey Liker, to my knowledge, has only ever been involved in one intervention. That was with Hertz Motor Cars. I listened for 3 hours in a conference in Sweden and talk about it. It was a massive failure. They took management's definition of a problem. They bought teams, trained them in tools, go out and solve problems. Hertz hit a cash crisis and fired all the lean teams. Jeffrey's standing there talking about how we can learn from this. And I'm thinking, no, you fool, you can't learn from this. You did entirely the wrong thing. How did Taiichi Ono teach people? He's the man who built the Toyota system. He made them study. What do the lean people do? They say, well, these tools work for Toyota, they must work for you. No, tools are a solution to a problem. You've got to work out what your problem is, how to do that study. Well, we're over time. I appreciate you hanging about. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to press what is called end this meeting